In this video, we're going to learn to use the paint technique to both fill and outline shapes. And to begin, I'm going to select my browser window and double click on some artwork to create, first of all, embroidery stitches. And that is because if you look at my techniques selection window, I have all of the techniques turned on, and by default the artwork is converted into embroidery technique. Now you need to be sure that the paint technique is turned on, and then you're able to select any shape in your design, and looking at the properties for fill, change it from an embroidery step fill to a paint zigzag or paint step or paint row fill. And all of these techniques mean that the shapes of our design will not be stitched on an embroidery machine, but will be drawn with drawing pens on a digital cutting machine. And so let me take a closer look at the shape that we've selected, and notice that it's set right now as a paint row fill, or let's change it to paint zigzag. And you can see the appearance of the stitching going back and forth. And I want to point out, if you use your view drop down menu, you can choose realistic paint. And when I choose realistic paint, notice it gives a little bit more of a three-dimensional look to the way that the paint will appear. So your three choices were zigzag, step, and row fill, and very much like doing the embroidery, zigzag will fill the area with lines that go back and forth like a satin stitch. Paint step will fill the area with lines that go back and forth like a step fill. Paint row fill will fill the areas going around the shape in a contouring fill. And in all the cases, you have the parameters that you can control for things like the density. So if I want to choose the zigzag fill and change the density from the default to perhaps more open, I'll see more space between the lines. And just like the difference between an embroidery satin and embroidery step, a paint zigzag means it can have multiple stitch directions. A paint step means it will be all one parallel stitch direction. And of course, you can always use the stitch flow tool to choose that direction of that paint fill. Or if it's a zigzag, you can also choose the directions to help with the placement of those stitches if you wanted to, give some direction to the software. That's what the stitch flow directions will do. Whenever we're using a digital cutting machine, of course, we have the ability to control with the artistic software the cutter presets for things like speed, pressure, and number of passes. And you can type those numbers in here, or you can select the cutter presets menu, and then in this case, choose for the edge, digital edge, the paint draw technique. And that will precede select the suggested cutter presets for that technique. So just like we have paint zigzag fill, step fill, and row fill, we can also outline shapes using the paint technique, and that means the paint tab or the outline tab. Now notice that this shape currently has the paint fill and no outline, and I can see it's a paint fill, and notice in my colors and design window that it shows that we have embroidery stitches still because we haven't converted everything, and we also have paint, so there's a different icon when you use the paint technique. But there's no outline, and of course you can always click to add an outline around a shape if you click on the colors on the outline side of the choice window. And so if I click here, it'll give a dark blue outline, and by default the outline starts as embroidery running stitches. But now in the outline tab I could change to a paint line or a paint zigzag, and again paint line means instead of embroidery stitches they'll be drawn with our digital cutting machine, and the paint line means like the run stitch, the single outline, versus the paint zigzag, which means like the satin serial, going back and forth in a zigzag pattern. And of course we always have parameters to control for things like the outline width or the density of our zigzag. And so if I change the width from the default to 2 millimeters, it'll get fatter. And if I take control of the density with this checkbox and then change the number, we'll see more space between the stitches. With outlines, you can also choose to offset, which would put a little bit of space between the fill and the outline. So if I choose to put an offset of, let's say, maybe 2 millimeters, see how it moved the outline around that shape 2 millimeters outside of it. So that is the paint technique. And of course, once you've created a design for a digital cutting machine, then you would use the File and Export option to choose Export to Digital Cutters, and then select the type of digital cutting machine that you have and save the design to the appropriate format from there. That is the paint technique, and this is our video on using paint fill and paint outlines.